Committee will come to order. We will now proceed under the 5-minute rule with questions. The chair recognizes the gentleman from California, Mr. McClintock.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Sheriff Boudreau, one of the obvious and most frightening aspects of this open border is the migration of the most violent gangs in the world into our communities, such as MS-13 and Tren de Aragua. You said that the cartels are already trying to sink roots into your community. Could you go a little bit more into the details of what you're dealing with now in Tulare County?
Yes, sir. What's interesting is that the cartels have actually infiltrated within California, even within agricultural businesses and businesses up and down the state of California. They are very smart, very good at what they do. They're businessmen. They're also very dangerous and violent, and they lead by intimidation and fear. In our county alone, the cartel that we dismantled was a Sinaloa cartel. The DEA is, of the 50 people we arrested, the DEA is still hunting down the primary suspect who actually lives in Sinaloa, Mexico. During the course of this investigation, we did learn that homicides had taken place up and down the state, as well as in the central San Joaquin Valley.
And did you say that one suspect was responsible for 25 murders?
Yes, sir. So in another case...
This is what you're seeing in California today in real time.
Real time. We have a man who was an assassin working for the cartel. And this man admitted to over 25 different assassinations that took place at the direction of the cartel. He was discovered after he had committed a homicide and accidentally had left a receipt from a gas station, and we caught him on video and was able to speak with him, and during the course of the investigation admitted to those. But what he also admitted is that he was responsible for a certain area of California, and there were many other assassins assigned by cartels in California, throughout California, that were responsible for those areas.
So this is going on all over the state, presumably, all over every state. Are you hearing from other sheriffs about these issues?
I am.
And what are they saying?
They're saying much of the same thing. You know, Sheriff Lamb is a good friend of mine out of Arizona who he and I speak pretty regularly. Much of what I speak of in regards to California and the violence as well as the human trafficking, it's mirrored in other states all throughout the United States.
Now, illegal migrants often arrive into this country deeply indebted to the Mexican cartels that do actually control the border. How do the cartels enforce these debts on the other migrants?
Enforce on the other who?
On the other migrants.
What's happening in our communities, we're seeing people who have come into the United States on work visas and or victim visas where they're living in these small migrant farming towns. The cartel wants to control these migrant towns and truly lead the same way that they are in other countries, specifically in Mexico.
So the violence we're seeing in Mexico is already here and is in the process of getting deeply rooted into our communities.
It's already rooted.
Wow. What impact would you say sanctuary policies are having on this phenomenon, as well as the Democrats' no-cash bail bonds?
Well, I can speak to California. As you are aware, Senate Bill 54 made California a sanctuary state. Here's some of the problems that we're facing. Every sheriff in the state of California in times past used to be able to ask immigration status of those who are arrested and coming through our jails. That no longer is in existence. Sheriffs and law enforcement are no longer allowed under Senate Bill 54, supported by Kamala Harris at the time, spearheading much of the Senate Bill 54 with Sacramento Democrats.
So when the Democrats tell us, well, there's no real evidence that illegal migrants cause more crimes, you're not even allowed to ask if they're illegal migrants.
Well, and that's part of the formula. If I'm not able to ask, then there's no data to support. And so we are legally bound in California from asking someone their immigration status under Senate Bill 54.
Now, the New York Post recently reported that NYPD officers were estimating that about 75% of the violent crimes they're arresting in Manhattan are committed by illegal migrants. Can you give us a rough estimate, just from your experience, what you think is going on in
I'd have to give you experience and opinion because the data doesn't allow me to collect it through the formula.
Right, but what's your estimate?
But what I can tell you is that the crimes that we're seeing based on our investigations that we're well over 50%.
Wow. I see my time's expired. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Thanks, the gentleman. The gentleman yields back. The gentleman from Maryland is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My staff prepared a speech for me today. I'm going to set that aside and just speak to the witnesses today who are survivors. And I want to say that I certainly offer my condolences. My heart goes out to you for the losses that you've suffered. I did want to say this too, though, in a slight departure from the script that these hearings typically take. I'm a former prosecutor. I spent 4 years as a prosecutor here in Washington, D.C. During the height of the crack wars, we averaged about 450 to 500 murders here per year. And then a short time after that, I became the state's attorney in Prince George's County, Maryland. Ms. Morin and Ms. Nobles, I think you're both from Maryland, and I think the people that handled your cases were state's attorneys as well. And one of the things I found, I got there in office in 2002. I didn't realize it when I was running, but there was a gang called MS-13 that had come to the district, Maryland and Virginia, and was a highly violent gang. They are organized criminally, and they were 20 plus years ago at the time, and they commit extreme violent acts along the lines of what you're talking about. Include, I think the first case we had was they killed a witness with a golf club. As a 14-year-old girl, they tricked her into going into a cemetery and they beat her to death in the head using a golf club to kill her. And I guess Bush was the president at the time. And, you know, we had similar kinds of issues as what we're talking about today. People going and coming back. They'd get deported from here even after being prosecuted. They made them serve out their jail time, and then they would deport them back to El Salvador. But one of them I talked to subsequently, he'd become a witness against other members in the gang, said basically they just viewed it as a free trip home because they knew that they could come back whenever they wanted to. And that was 2003. I think one of the things I'd like to say to you all is I deeply respect taking up the mantle that you've taken up today. You're able to speak with a moral authority that politicians like me really can't. And I know you'd rather trade that in a heartbeat to get your loved ones back. And I know we can't do that today. But I'll say this as well. I've been involved in public service for a long time. In fact, that was my first boss in politics right there, John Conyers. He was the chairman of the committee last time it passed legislation on immigration, which was over 35 years ago. And I also had a chance to, and they did that on a bipartisan basis, by the way. And when I was state's attorney in Prince George's County, we did a joint prosecution with the federal prosecutor in a RICO case. We took down 23 gang leaders. The prosecutor in that case was Rod Rosenstein. And Rod and I had known each other because we'd been on the opposite sides of the Whitewater case. I worked for the Senate Democrats, essentially defending the Clinton administration. He worked for Ken Starr, essentially trying to take down the Clinton administration. And he was obviously a Republican. I was obviously a Democrat, but we were able to come together and work that case together and do it in a successful way. Now, you'll notice that at this hearing, that there's no legislation connected to the testimony that's being presented today. I think one of you actually referenced Ted Cruz legislation in the Senate side, but there's nothing pending here in the House that would address the problems we're talking about today. We had the chance to do that, but we chose not to do that. The chairman and my Republican colleagues chose not to do that, and there's a story behind that I don't have time to tell, but it doesn't really get to the point I want to make to you, which is this. Beyond this election cycle, because that's an issue that's in the way of getting something done right now that'll address the kinds of problems that you're talking about, there's going to be more opportunities for you to use your voices and your platforms to address these kinds of issues. I'm a Democrat, you're Republicans, or they're Republicans, you may be independents, I don't know. But I know that there's truth on both sides on this issue, and there's a way to get to a place where we can resolve it, but we won't do it in a partisan way. And so I want to thank you for coming today, and I urge you to continue the struggle, the fight, the voice. I think, Ms. Nungari, you said you will forever be her voice. I know that's true for all of you, and I encourage you to continue in that fight and that effort. But I hope that we can get to a point where we move beyond the partisanship, beyond the politics that have nothing to do with resolving the problem, and can get to a place where we can address it. Could I, just for an additional moment, Mr. Chairman, if I could read Justice Kavanaugh, this is a quote I read every time we have a hearing like this, and he's a Republican, obviously, but I want to say, as the district court found, the executive branch does not possess the resources necessary to arrest or remove all of the non-citizens covered by the arrest and removal statutes. That reality is not an anomaly, it is a constant. For the last 27 years since those laws were enacted in their current form, all 5 presidential administrations have determined that resource constraints necessitated prioritization in making immigration arrests. In light of the inevitable resource constraints and regularly changing public safety and public welfare needs, the executive branch must balance many factors when devising arrest and prosecution policies. I read that just to say this. 5 administrations have come and gone. We still haven't gotten things done. We're not going to get anything done today from a legislative standpoint, but there's a way to get it done if we can come together and work in a bipartisan way to do it. And so I thank you for the work that you've done and you will continue to do. And I yield back the balance.
The gentleman yields back. Before yielding to the gentleman from Arizona, I would just point out, bad things may have happened 20 years ago, but obviously more bad things are happening now in light of 10 million people in 3.5 years coming into the country. That's the different dynamic. That's what our witnesses are talking about. I yield to the gentleman from Arizona.
If I might,
5 minutes.
Mr. Chairman?
I gave you an extra 2 minutes, Mr.
Mr. Chairman, thank you.